The following is a special presentation of Odyssey Los Angeles.
From the helpful Honda Soundspace on the Miracle Mile, this is Awareness is Not Enough.
And I'm Listening Town Hall from KNX News.
Here are Mike Simpson and Charles Feldman.
People have never been as open, as honest about their mental health struggles as they are right now. We see celebrities talking about anxiety and depression. Schools emphasize mental health and getting treatment for their students. Parents are more tuned into their kids' needs, and there are more tools to get help than ever before. There's Zoom therapy sessions, there's crisis hotlines, and yet, in spite of all the attention, in spite of all the awareness, the mental health crisis is getting worse.
In fact, the CDC estimates that last year, about 50,000 Americans ended up victims of their own suicide, killing themselves. It was the highest number ever recorded. Now, this is not a new trend by any means, nor is it really tied, as many people think, to the pandemic. When we heard so much about mental health, you all recall that. Suicide rates in this country, they have been rising steadily for more than 20 years. So, why is it that awareness doesn't seem to be working? And what will work?
That's what we're examining in today's town hall, heard across Los Angeles on Odyssey's family of stations. KNX News, 97.1 FM, K-Earth 101, Jack FM, 94.7 The Wave, K-Rock, and Channel Q. It's our voice for the LGBTQ plus community, particularly hard hit by this issue.
We'll be spending the next hour talking to people who have stared down suicide, whether they've dealt with it themselves or lived through the death of a loved one. And we'll talk to professionals, too, about what must be done. We start with the people who have lived it. Ryan Dusick was the founding drummer of Maroon 5 until a mix of physical and psychological issues prevented him from being able to play the drums. He was forced out of the band, driving him into a deep depression and substance abuse. He went to rehab, went back to school, and is now practicing a marriage and family therapist. Zach Williams is the son of the late Robin Williams, who took his own life in 2014. Since then, Zach has worked as a mental health advocate. He's founder and CEO of the nutritional supplement company, PIM.
Anthony Rodriguez is here. He experienced way too much trauma way too early in his life. He watched his father die in front of him at the age of 5. He's a survivor of sexual abuse, was jumped into an East LA gang at the age of 12, and is the survivor of several suicide attempts. But he hung on. He's the co-founder of the mental health care nonprofit, the Santa Barbara Response Network. And Tracy Cooper Harris, U.S. Army Sergeant, served in both Iraq wars and worked in support of the Afghanistan campaign, member of the Iraq-Afghanistan Veterans Association, now a military veterans liaison on the staff of a Southern California congresswoman. Tracy featured prominently in the documentary on military vets surviving home.
Welcome to all of you. Thank you for taking part in this important broadcast. There is a tombstone on the outskirts of the city of Seattle, and inscribed on it, it says, "Bitter memories, sweet regrets." It was the very last thing, as far as anyone can tell, that person wrote the day before he killed himself. That person was my brother. I decided to put that on his tombstone because I was puzzled by the contradictory thoughts that were clearly going through his mind 24 hours before he decided to end his own life. So we're all kind of in this together in many ways, I think. Anthony, let me start with you because you went down the road that my brother did, but fortunately you are still here. That saying that I said he wrote, that I had inscribed on his tombstone, does it make sense to you?
Well, we all have different walks of life, different experiences, and unfortunately we never know what somebody else has been going through. For myself, it kind of hits, but there's been so much in my life that has happened that You're right. I'm still here, and I never thought I would still be here. I didn't expect to still be here. My mom bought my plot at 16 years old, thinking that I was going to be gone by then. And so it's amazing. I don't feel like it's real sometimes. I don't feel like I deserve it sometimes. Because sometimes when you're told, especially with the sexual abuse, I was told to stay quiet because otherwise I was going to be the one that destroyed the family if I opened my mouth. I was only 5 years old. My dad had just died in April. My abuse started in July. And I'll never forget the date. That's the thing about trauma. You never forget certain dates sometimes. But it is bittersweet sometimes. I guess I could say that, yeah. Never thought of it that way. I am grateful that I'm here. Never thought I would say that, to be honest with you. I just wanted to die because I felt that if I was dead, then I wouldn't be here to hurt my family or be here to hurt somebody else. Or I can make the abuse stop. It was just better off that way. But now I'm grateful that I do see things a lot different. And it's not that I don't struggle, because every day is a struggle because there's other things happening. But I've learned ways to be able to cope with it. And I think that's one thing that we forget to teach a lot of our kids is how to cope with difficult situations and allow them to feel whatever they want to feel. Because we shut it up, we tell them to stay quiet, don't worry about it, let it go, don't cry. But you know what, if somebody hurts you, you have a right to cry. That's our outlet, but I never knew that. I was told to shut up, suck it up, and deal with it. So I didn't know how to cry, I didn't know how to say I needed help, I didn't know how to say somebody's hurting me or touching me. And because that's embarrassing. It's as a guy, you're supposed to not let anybody do that, but at 5 years old, there's nothing but fear that comes through you. You feel disgusting. You feel gross. You feel it's your fault because you're being told it's your fault. And it's a hard situation. And there's so many other people that go through those things and they think they're alone. I thought I was alone until I started speaking up about it. And there's stigma around it. Some people have turned their backs on me after they heard my story. Some people that I really depended on and appreciated, and I was told to stay away from them because they didn't associate themselves with people like me. Well, what is a person like me? It wasn't my fault. But the stigma sticks with you. But that's the thing, what we need to stop is we need to stop stigmatizing things. We need to let people know that things happen, yeah, and we should be able to talk about it and make it open to talk about. Don't just hear things, listen to the words that people are telling you. Awareness is not enough. Literally, it's not enough. There's so much that we can do by just noticing something different and asking if that's okay. And I actually want to say thank you to Zach because right now I'm going through a difficult time with my mom. And the first thing, he stopped me straight in my tracks and said, I want to know how you're doing. Nobody's ever done that. And I appreciate that because, yeah, I'm hurting, I'm struggling. But nobody ever asked that. So I want to say thank you so much for doing that, man. Because
Why do you think we forget to ask people that?
Because we're afraid about the answer.
Even just anywhere. All these little micro, hey, how are you?
I don't know what to do. I don't know if they tell me that they're having a hard time, I don't know what to say.
A lot of times it's afraid of basically you're opening up Pandora's box, and then once you get the answer, well, what do you do? Well, how do you help them? Because a lot of us up here, and just in general, we want to help. But if we don't know what to do, then now we feel bad because we can't help. So, piggybacking off of what this young man said, as far as, I was military, served in the Army for altogether 12 years, and the mantra is suck it up and drive on. Mental health for us in the military is, basically, you know what, if you have something to do, you handle it on your own. Don't tell your chain of command because basically it's a career killer. Hopefully, and I say this with a grain of salt, it's gotten a little bit better since I got out in 2003, but not that much. You're still dealing with a lot of stress. You're still dealing with folks from different backgrounds, different places coming together. Unfortunately, you have people that still prey upon the weaker in the military and make their lives living hell. And so what are you going to do? You're going to do everything in your power to try to take away that pain. I had a buddy of mine, knock on wood, he actually, I think he came back home from his second deployment. He was in the hospital for trying to take his own life. And the military was like, oh, great. Thank you so much for, you woke up, and they kicked him out.
Zach, Were you and your family aware, talking about awareness, of the agony that your father must have been going through? I mean, here he was, a very famous person, very funny person, and clearly with his own demons that he needed to deal with and didn't, in the end, deal with them successfully. What sort of outreach, if any, did he have? Did he?
Yeah, I'll answer that as directly as I can. Yes, we were aware. We dealt with it in a private, family-oriented way. I do talk about it publicly in many circumstances, but the experience that we dealt with as a family is the experience that many families around the world deal with when it comes to the nature of suicide. There's a public grieving process and there's a private grieving process. And when it comes to things like spiraling mental health considerations, addiction, potentially in situations of health conditions that lead to a degenerative situation, the experience that I dealt with was not unlike the experience of so many others, in that, yes, there was witnessing of someone in a state of suffering. And, you know, from what I've learned subsequent to it is that I think when it came to our experience as a family, it was hard to even talk about what we were experiencing and going through because of the nature of stigma and how we can judge ourselves just as we can judge others through this process, not only of grieving, but also of healing. And so in my work, I identify as a systems-based mental health advocate focusing on programming, awareness, research, advocacy, and policy. I have to look at my own experience with being diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and depression, and how that has ultimately colored not only my advocacy, but my process of healing. In turn, what I found in looking at, you know, what my father experienced, but also in terms of my experience with suicide early on in my life when my cousin, who was 12 years old, and I was 13 years old, died by suicide. And over the course of 2 decades, I realized I kind of mentally swept that under the rug in terms of that process and experience of dealing with the trauma and so forth. And the thing for me, what's dawned on me over time is I found that service is my path to healing and happiness, but I can't be of service unless I'm really identifying how I can best take care of myself. So to circle back to your question, did you identify an issue? Were you talking about it as a family? Yes. Some of those elements were private. From a public perspective, the experience that I saw in terms of dealing with my father going through stages of frustration and so forth was wanting to be of help and not sure how I could best be of support. And that was frustrating for me and ultimately led me to answer difficult questions around my own experience with mental health and things like suicidal ideation.
So Ryan, going from rock star to therapist now, we've heard a lot about stigma. We've heard just now about finding a path to try and help others, because that can help you too. I mean, what do you tell people now when they come in to see you?
Well, you know, I think for me, you know, as somebody who really struggled when I was on the road and dealing with things that I was pushing down, I wasn't talking about, I wasn't able to communicate them to anyone around me. Not that they didn't care, it was just, there was the stigma. You know, the stigma about being tough, you know, just not allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And I think it's so important. The advice I give to families at this point is just show that you care and ask questions more than anything. And if somebody I know or somebody I'm working with is struggling, the best thing I can do is to show that I want to hear what their experience is. You know, because we bottle these things up inside and we don't have an outlet for them. And expression of them is the first step. You know, being able to feel like somebody is hearing me, somebody can at least try to understand what's going on inside of me. Because we feel so alone in what we're experiencing. At least I did, and that compounded the issue for me because I was already struggling, and now I felt alone in the process of struggling. And so, being able to speak up is the first step.
Tracy, we started the program with the title, which is that awareness is not enough. What then is? Anything?
In addition to awareness, basically talking about it, not just talking, but being able to listen. So if you're checking in with a friend of yours and you're noticing something's off, ask, hey, I'm noticing you're, feeling, looking a little down. Is everything okay? Is there anything I can help you with? Sometimes it's just hanging out with them, just showing that you're there in that moment. Asking them point blank, hey, are you feeling like you're going to do some harm to yourself? Would you like me to help you reach out to this entity, that entity, whatever? Do you need me to just talk to you? Sometimes just that little bit of effort means so much. And I think that's one of the things that, everybody in here can do when it comes to that. As far as what else can be done, I know that our elected leaders have tried as much as possible to, bring legislation from, federal level all the way down to the local levels. And at maybe the more local levels and the state level, some of it is working. Federal right now, not as much. However, keeping those conversations going, because mental health in this crisis is affecting everybody. It's affecting, especially after the COVID-19 crisis, it's affecting the kids in the school, especially with young people being like bullied and things like that, the social interactions. It's out there. So we need to basically do that little bit of difficult lifting as far as, hey, I see you're having some issues going on with your mom. Do you need somebody just to listen to you? Or I'm here. Anytime you want to talk, call me at 2 a.m, even text. I'm okay with that. And
Anthony,
I have that option for my friends as well.
Did you have someone that you could have had a 2 a.m. call with? If a crisis line was easier to access, would you have called?
Didn't feel like I had anyone. I felt completely alone. And also, like, at work, we have a lot of people that we work with, coworkers and stuff, but it's not really open. So that's one thing that I actually did when you're asking about what else can be done. Well, I work for the Food Bank of Santa Barbara County. I'm the Operations and Disaster Services Specialist. And one thing that I brought up was the fact of during COVID, everybody was struggling. We're having a hard time. We're really busy. And I started noticing people's kind of getting tired. Your mental health is going crazy. Well, I brought up the fact that we should be able to have some time just to talk, just to let everything out and not be judged and not get fired for it. Just say whatever it is we want to say. But I'm glad they paid attention to the whole point that I was trying to make, and that was being able to have a day off without no questions, just if somebody asks, I need a day off, just give it to them, okay? Because a lot of us feel like if we ask for a day off, we're going to get fired, or they're going to ask too many questions, or they're going to think that we can't handle our situations or whatever's going on in our life. Well, you know what? We're human beings, and things happen. And if we need a day off, we should be able to feel like, okay, I need a day off and not be questioned about it. Well, what Food Bank has done, and I'm very grateful for Food Bank, we actually have employee days now. So we have mandatory days that we have to take off. And they're free days for us to be able to take care of whatever it is that we want to do. But they're mandatory. And we did that ever since COVID started. And that has done such an amazing, amazing work for a lot of us there that there's a lot of things that go on at Food Bank. It's not cut and dry, but that right there was so helpful, and it is helpful. And I hope that other organizations will pick up something like that. I do self-care bingo for all the people, just for them to be able to get charged up and think about themselves. Because who am I to say do this if I can't do it myself? So I gotta prove myself, right? So now I tried to make myself, come up with other ideas and it's things that other organizations and businesses can do for their employees. And it doesn't cost much.
Zach, let me bounce something off you that Tracy mentioned about, if you have a friend or somebody, then you think that they're in trouble, to go beyond just being aware of it, but to broach the subject perhaps and talk to them. And your family, you were mentioning, did have private discussions with your dad. Were you ever worried, was your family worried that by bringing up the subject? Because a lot of people are very worried about that if they bring up to a friend, and you're shaking your head, yes, right? All of you are. That if they bring up the subject of, hey, are you thinking of doing something to, harming yourself? They're afraid that they're going to be planting the notion in that person's mind. So they stand back and they don't ask that question. What was your own experience like?
I can speak to my experience as an advocate and as a suicide survivor, and it's two different experiences.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. As a suicide survivor, my own experience was one of seeking questions around how I was coping with and dealing with the trauma and the grief even prior to specific suicide event, because of the nature of seeing someone frustrated and in need of support. And so that's something that I've had to work through, both in a familial environment and also in terms of, from a healing environment within the community, because I'm a big fan of community support as a modality of healing. As a mental health advocate, the perspective I'd have is that we really need to take a multi-generational approach to addressing the issue. The way in which our parents' generation deals with stigma, I speak to my parents' generation, we're of different generations here at the panel, but the way in which you speak to a 4-year-old is very different than you speak to in terms of how you speak around things like mental health and stigma, just as speaking with a 20-year-old is different, speaking with a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old, and so forth. And there's different orientations towards action based upon the generation. I can speak to my experience in advocating for solutions for older generations, people 50 and over. Often not a lot of considerations relating to mental health is talked about. So what happens is you reach a situation of dysregulation, toxic stress, overload, what have you, and then, it's very sudden. You have someone in crisis when you didn't even realize that they were having mental health consideration. Younger generations tend to be more open in talking about what their experiences with mental health and so forth. So there's opportunities to engage, potentially diagnose in some situations, a situation that in turn can be addressed from a preventative standpoint. And the challenge between crisis-oriented care and preventative-oriented care is that crisis-oriented care is about 4 times more expensive. In some situations, 8, 9, 10 times more expensive. And preventative care is accessible. It's generally low cost. It's available in ways in which you can help educate people around things like nutrition, fitness, mindfulness, community support, when and where available therapy. That's another topic, is the accessibility of therapy. But from my perspective, when it comes to dealing with the situation of stigma, especially when you're seeing someone suffering, is understanding how willing and open they are to speak about these issues. And if they're not willing and open to speak about it, potentially offering opportunities to potentially engage in preventative types of solutions. Maybe orient, realign diet, maybe establish fitness, maybe establish, connecting with a community organization. I'm a big fan of 12-step. For example.
As a clinician, I think the evidence suggests that raising the topic of suicide is more helpful than harmful, because if you're experiencing something that suggests this is of a concern, chances are you're not bringing up something they haven't thought about themselves. So suicidal thoughts are very common, more common than we talk about. We probably should talk about how common they are. It's something that I've experienced in my life, even though I was never actively suicidal. So you're not, at least in my opinion as a clinician, you're not implanting anything that's not already there. If anything, what you're doing is you're offering an opportunity for that person to talk about something that they're probably ashamed about acknowledging and talking about.
Should we also understand, and you do, how powerful the brain can be when it's telling you something and you're kind of fighting against it? I mean, your case is amazingly interesting because you were a very good drummer and you couldn't drum, like physically could not do it anymore because of various, it wasn't going. And when I first heard that, I kind of thought, okay, it's like explaining a panic attack to someone who's never had a panic attack. They go, oh yeah, it sounds bad. It's like, no, you don't get it. You think you are dying and you cannot be convinced that you are not dying. Like, if you're fighting against that, then it's like you against yourself, but you're stuck in your own head.
Yeah, and it's a feedback loop inside of you, right? So you get in this space where, you know, the thing that is so painful becomes more painful because now you feel like there's something wrong with me, there's something defective about me. And the chances are that there's a lot of other people experiencing the very same thing that you are, and if you are able to have that outlet, able to speak up about it, then you're going to have that connection. And we're talking about disconnect, right? Like, what's the disconnect here? Connection is the answer to disconnect, right? Ways in which we can connect more effectively.
Let me mention just a few figures. I don't want to get too bogged down in statistics, but it is noteworthy, I think, that we talk a little bit about that. That males make up 50% of the American population, but are nearly 80% of all suicides. Senior citizens between the ages of 75 and 85 plus have the highest suicide rates of any age demographic. The next highest rate was among people aged 25 to 34. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people aged 10 to 24, particularly a tragic figure. LGBTQ youth are more than four times as likely to attempt suicide than their peers. I wonder if the panel can address that, because there does seem to be a crisis in that group. And
Rejection. Rejection. Not being accepted of who they are. And that's the thing, is that they're human beings. No matter who they love or who they don't love, they're human, they have a heart, and they deserve to be respected, treated with respect, and just acknowledged, you know what, it's okay. And a lot of these teens, because I work with a lot of teens now, is they don't want to be here because their families are not accepting them for who they are. And it's not right. I mean, I understand that there might not be that belief that it's okay, but people should be able to love whoever they want to love, but they're human beings.
Tracy?
Yeah, and the bottom line is that's your child.
Yep.
You know, that is someone that you helped raise, you know them. I had an issue with my own stepfather when I was a kid. He thought I was going to do something to my mom because of her medical condition. And, you know, it totally tore me up. But the thing is, we had I like to say, a come to Jesus moment where we sat down and talked about this. And it got to the point where, you know, I had to have him understand I'm still the same person, and your rejection of me based on just who I love is, you know, I said, people have been killed for less. When I was a kid growing up, or young person growing up, this was during the time of basically Brandon Tina and Matthew Shepard. And so you're seeing all this on the news. You're seeing that, you know, the LGBT community isn't accepted. You're seeing that, you know, we're something to be feared. We're something to be, you know, we're vile. We're, you know, doing all this crazy stuff out here. And so I think that makes it more challenging for young people to feel comfortable coming out to their parents, and then for the parents to be accepting. And that's why you have such a high rate of not only suicide, these kids running away, these kids ending up in jail, all these other things, when all it takes is, hey, listen, hear me. I'm the same kid that you raised. Have the same values and stuff like that. This is one part of who I am.
Does it also come down to, you know, sometimes the most terrifying thing is starting the really tough conversation, and then afterwards, although it was no picnic, it is so much better on the other side than just letting that simmer for who knows how long before that thing just boils over. Yeah.
You blow up if you keep holding it in. That was one thing that I was taught to hold everything in. The day that I blew up, I got myself into a lot of trouble. I ended up in jail because I blacked out. And you know what? Honestly, I'm really not a bad guy, I don't think. Now I have 67 godchildren. I've been married for 23 years. And I'm still here standing next to some amazing people that I just met backstage. And honestly, for me, it's an honor. I can't even believe I'm here. So.
Well, you said something earlier, too, when we were starting off. You said so much has happened. And I guess you can apply that to before. So many things happened in your life, but then you're still here. So much has happened after because you're still here.
Yeah. my mom is at end-stage Alzheimer's, like I said. So that's one of the hardest things I think that I've been through. I've been shot, been stabbed, been left for dead. There's just been so much. You begin to believe when people tell you things. But what I think saved me was my wife. When I first met her, I told her everything about me, that I was in drugs, that I was in a gang, and that I was waiting for her to leave me. And and then all of a sudden she just said, I can't believe you just told me all that, but I don't know what to do. But I'm not going to leave you alone. We'll figure it out together. That was it.
All I can say is wives are amazing. Mine's in the audience right now. Shout out. Love you, Maggie. So, and basically the same thing when we first started dating. I'm like, look here, lady, I'm a little messed up.
Yeah.
I'm trying to warn you. And she's like, oh, whatever. No. And, she has been with me through a lot. Unfortunately, there came a point in my life where I attempted to take my own life as well, and ended up on the 6th or 3rd floor. We're at the West LA VA. And, I lost friends to suicide. So this is, pretty close to me. I had a chance to meet Robin Williams in real life during when he came out for the USO tours. And, the fact that, I still have a picture of him up on my wall right now. And the fact when we heard that, he ended up taking his own life, what that always does to me is you have these folks that we see in the community that are so strong. And you're like, oh my God, if these people are the ones that took their lives, and what hope is there for someone like me?
Well, can I just say, first off, he loved the troops with all his heart. And second to that, I will say that he was strong till the very end. And that needs to be understood. It's not a sign of weakness.
Ryan,
When you establish, when people attempt suicide or potentially die by suicide.
They're not selfish. It's not selfishness.
Yeah. And as part of that, thank you for saying that. A really important thing to share for whomever needs to hear it is, for the suicide survivor community, it's not selfish to take time for oneself and to love oneself. Because sorry.
No. I was just going to say, now that you said that, I did also meet your dad when I was 5 years old, right before my dad died. He went to the hospital to go meet people that were in the hospital. And I have his autograph, and I just thought about that right now when you mentioned that. And I still have that. And this is a little emotional right now. Haven't thought of that in years, and I just thought.
Ryan,
So.
as somebody who's a therapist now, family therapist, what have you learned about yourself?
Oh, so much I've learned, and I continue to learn a lot about myself in this process. I look at everything I do at this point as extended therapy for me, because I got into this field, we talked about service. Service has been so powerful to me, to be somebody who can give back and to actually be helpful to other people. That was something I didn't have any ability to do for a long time in my life, because I was just really having to care for myself and the things I was struggling with on a daily basis. So to be able to walk into a room and actually have something to offer another human being in a helpful way, it's really a powerful, fulfilling thing. But things come up every single day with your clients that if you haven't dealt with it in yourself, it's going to come up in your clients, and you're going to have to deal with it then. So just being in grad school, there was a lot of work to be done in terms of sort of plumbing the depths of my soul, the things I hadn't even worked through yet, and that process continues today as a clinician.
We want to thank, our program is going to continue, but at the moment we want to thank very much for all of you guys being here and sharing your stories. Ryan Dusick, Zach Williams, Anthony Rodriguez, and Tracy Cooper Harris. Thank you so much for being as candid as you have been, and I'm sure that people listening to this will appreciate it greatly. And you never know, maybe you saved someone's life. Maybe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So now that we've heard these stories of survival, how can we move beyond awareness and make sure we get people considering suicide the help that they need before it's too late, and before it gets to the point where they're thinking about hurting themselves? And that is why our next group of guests happens to be here.
Yeah, we're going to hear now from the clinicians, the therapists, the crisis coordinators. These are the people on the front lines in the fight against suicide. Amy Kane is coming up, marriage and family therapist. She's the Associate Director of Mental and Behavioral Health at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. Also, Carolyn Levitin, licensed clinical social worker, Senior Director of Crisis Care at D.D. Hirsch, the Suicide Prevention Center.
And also joining us is Dr. Lisa Wong, who is a clinical psychologist and director of the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, who is a clinical psychologist, founder and director of the Youth and Family Institute, and founder of the Global Mental Health Lab at Pitzer College, exploring ways to increase access to mental health care. Thank you all for being with us. We all appreciate it. Let me start with you, Dr. Rodriguez. You heard the panel that we had before talking about how awareness isn't enough, and they all, I think, gave very poignant answers on why it isn't enough. As a professional, what do you think is needed?
I think maybe a conceptualization of what suicide, the function that suicide ideation, that these thoughts serve. Often it's a sign that people are feeling like there is no other solution. And so I think at one level, it's if all we do is focus on those thoughts and those urges, but not on that for that person they are a solution, and to try to find some other solution so that they feel not so out of control and helpless for getting their core needs met, then you actually, in some ways, can remove the need for suicide as that solution. And yeah, so I would say a part of what's needed is a focus on actual solutions. Not, again, as clinicians, I think we do our best to try to, to try to support people in those ways. And a lot of times we're focusing on reducing people's anxiety, their OCD symptoms, their ADHD, their substance use, which ironically for them is a coping mechanism. That is how they're coping with their anxiety, and their anxiety is rescuing them from feeling out of control and helpless of getting their core needs met, which is partly because of the trauma that was mentioned earlier. And so if all we do is focus on reducing symptoms, right, providing psychiatric medication, but not on helping people increase a sense of agency that they can actually get their core needs met, then we are putting a Band-Aid on a problem. And so I think what is enough, I think part of what's needed is a conceptualization that's closer to the source of the problem.
So Dr. Wong, how do we start to unpack that closer to the source rather than Band-Aids?
Well, I think this is such an important point that you bring up, because we have to consider the function, right? How do you take away something that's serving a purpose for somebody and not give them anything in return? And I think this is where it becomes very important that we consider what protective factors we can put in place for people. You know, I do think, though, that awareness is not enough, but we still have a long way to go with awareness, especially in our communities of color. But I think that the next step really is making sure those protective factors are in place so that if we want to swap out something that maybe is serving a function but not as healthy, we can have something to put in its place that will be healthier and that will help protect that person from the possibility of suicide later.
Amy, we heard in the previous segment of the program about what really is an epidemic among the LGBT plus community of suicide. As somebody who is a clinician who has to deal with this, and I presume you have probably more often than you would like, why is that happening now when we do live in an era when some people think things are more open, they see that there's been some dramatic changes for the good as well as the bad, but largely for the good. Why is this epidemic happening now, do you think?
2 steps forward, 1 step back. Mm-hmm. I think that we are living in a very scary time politically. I think that the LGBT community is seeing half of this country say, you are not equal, we do not like you, we want you to go away. There are currently upwards of 750 bills on the Senate floor, anti-LGBT removing rights. So while we think, and I think, we're in California and things are better here, but then you look at Glendale and the protests at North Hollywood, and the parents are trying to remove education for LGBT and support for LGBT students. So while the message in some ways is we've taken steps, in other ways not. And I think it's a really scary time to be part. I'm going to sort of use the umbrella term queer community, although it may not apply to everyone, but to be part of the queer community and look around and say, well, there are a lot of people out there that really hate us. It's scary. And so when we talk about things like a family, disowning a queer child, and then they look out into the community and say, oh, and also you don't like me and you're trying to get rid of me, where do you go? That's really isolating for someone, especially the intersectionalities of their identity, right? Like if this is a queer person of color, the multiple marginalizations in the community, where do you go?
Carolyn, when people go to you guys and they call that phone number, what actually happens?
So when someone calls our line, either in emotional crisis or suicidal crisis or worried about someone else, and they're calling 988, we're first going to listen, try to build rapport, connect, listen to someone's reasons for wanting to die if they're suicidal. Before we can talk about safety, we really have to validate the pain that someone is in. And then we want to do a safety assessment to really see how at risk potentially this person is, and then explore buffers, explore a safety plan. What can we connect you to today to keep you safe? And many people that are in a suicidal crisis feel like they have two options. I can either live forever and be in this horrible emotional pain, or I can die today. And many times they don't want to pick either, but they don't know of any other options. And so at the 988 crisis line at D.D. Hirsch, we really focus on how can you stay safe today? Let's just focus on today.
But I want to go back to something that we talked about with the other panel, which was, because there are two different issues in a way. There's the person who is thinking about suicide and perhaps calls. And then there's the person who thinks that a friend or a loved one is thinking about it, but may be afraid to call because of concern that they're making a mountain out of a molehill, or maybe their friend is going to find out that they called and get really angry with them and they'll lose a friend. What do you say to those people who have those suspicions, but as they reach for their phone, they draw back, never make the call?
Well, I would definitely emphasize that 988 is a free and confidential service. I think anyone that has curiosity or wants to know what it's like or is concerned about someone else or themselves should call just to see. We have a lot of experience with supporting third parties in helping someone that they're concerned about in their personal life. And I've asked a lot of people if they're suicidal in their lives, and the only thing that they can say is if they're not, they'll just say no. I've never had anyone get angry at me or upset at me for asking them if they have thoughts of suicide. If anything, I think it shows a lot of care and concern for our friends and family to check in with them like that.
Dr. Wong?
I think that's a very important person, though, to focus on. Because at some point in our lives, we will all be that person. We will all be that person who knows somebody who may be at risk or who may be contemplating. And if we can let those people know that they have a place to go, they have someone to call, they have somebody who can respond, they have knowledge, education behind them, then they will be less afraid to be that person who actually says something and reach out. And I think a lot of times when we hear from folks who have survived a loved one making an attempt or dying by suicide, we hear from them, I wanted to say something, I just didn't know what to say.
So to go back to our show title, awareness isn't enough, it's not enough, then I think what I'm hearing from all of you is the next part of that is awareness isn't enough, but you need action, right?
Yes, exactly. I think, one common theme that the last panel talked about too was connection. But the other theme throughout what's necessary to make a dent in these numbers is movement. So we have to make connections, but we have to use those connections to take an action.
Dr. Rodriguez, what more in terms of access do people need? What do you advocate for? We have, an easier way to get in touch with someone than ever before. But on the flip side of that, you also can't fix a bunch of people who probably feel like they don't have those close relationships, someone to call on, and we're probably more, separated than ever before. You can have 500 Facebook friends, but can you actually message your Facebook friends? They're not. Are they your real friends?
Yeah. I think what more, it's tricky because you're asking a panel of mental health professionals. And I think the irony is maybe the APA, American Psychological or American Psychiatric Association, have done too good a job of marketing ourselves, where the solution seems to be, if you have a mental health problem, you need meds, you need therapy. And in some ways that's helpful, right? And we have increased access to care. And in some ways, it's limiting of people's imagination. If suicide is serving the function of helping people feel like they're out of connection of their core needs, and you say, go to therapy, or even worse, like you have a phone call, and to validate this person's concerns, where you're mentioning earlier, like what if I ask someone, what if I call, and then there is a wellness check, and that ends up with a hospitalization. I think those concerns aren't totally unjustified, because then if someone tries that, if someone is sent to the hospital, it doesn't feel helpful, then the thought is, maybe I'm beyond help. So I think one thing that can be helpful is to think outside of the box, that with all best intentions, the APAs have convinced us is where the solution lies, and to actually look at like more holistic ways to create connection, and to not just be limited by, oh, I know, therapy's gonna help, meds are gonna help, because they will. And I think people have never been lonelier than they are now. People have never spent less time eating as a family than they have now. People have never lived more separate from their distant relatives than they are now, and never been less satisfied with the jobs that they have now. And the youth that I work with, they're concerned about things like climate change. I didn't know what that was till I was in college. And now, like, my 10-year-old daughter is asking me questions about, the polar ice caps, and is worrying about something that she has no agency over. Sure. And so these are some of the struggles that are happening. So trying to come up with solutions that are not necessarily going to be found in therapy or in medication is one thing that can be done, is pointing people.
Amy, go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, I think to your point, you have 500 Facebook friends. Are you really going to reach out to them? Yeah, maybe. Or is it that one, brave person that posts on Facebook, hey, I'm here. If you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, you can reach out to me. It takes that person who posts it, and one person who hasn't seen them since high school is like, oh, someone cares. Sorry, someone cares about me.
We'll fix it in post.
Okay. Someone cares about me. There's someone in the world, right? Like, we all just want to be witnessed, right? As human beings, we just want to be witnessed.
Well, there can be beauty in a stranger too.
Yes.
It's a double thing.
And someone
right?
saying,
can I talk to them, but
no questions asked.
pay attention to you.
You have an open door to me. Yeah, maybe it is a Facebook friend.
Well, I was going to ask, does there need to be more sort of points of contact, more people who, somebody who has suicidal thoughts can go to and in effect unload, other than a suicide prevention line or something like that? People often will see maybe a family physician once a year, but many doctors don't really concentrate on mental health because they're busy doing things like how's your blood pressure or that sort of thing. Do more people need to be either trained or made aware that when they have contact with certain people, that this is something they shouldn't be afraid to broach the subject? Karen?
Well, I think you bring up a great point. And speaking to your point, we really need to highlight the strength of vulnerability, because I think that's really where the connection starts. A lot of people think that they need to have the solution to help someone with suicidal ideation. You do not need to solve someone's problems. If anything, you can say, I don't even know what to say right now, that you're in so much pain, but I'm so happy you told me. Yes. So just the ability to be vulnerable and sit in a dark space with someone when they're hurting and in pain, that is what opens the door.
Yes, but then what do you do as a follow-through? So your friend tells you this, and you absorb it, and you say, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm sorry you're in so much pain, but I don't know what to tell you. Then you hang up the phone, or maybe you leave the lunch that you're at or the brunch. What do you then do? Do you have an obligation?
Everybody's going to want to
anything?
make a recommendation.
Right.
Sure.
We want to solve things.
Sure. Well, and the thing is, we as friends and family do not have to have all the solutions. We can call these resources that are available to us. Anyone can call 988, even a professional, a therapist in a session with a client can call 988 with the client. Let's talk to someone who's an expert in this area. Let's see what the next steps are. Let's see what resources are available to you. So you're right, we never want to leave someone alone who's in a suicidal crisis, but we do not have to fix it ourselves. We can link to longer term options.
Amy?
Well, I think, what do? You say, I'm going to sit here and be with you. That's, I mean, as a, maybe not a licensed clinician, a human being with another human being. Okay, I'm going to climb in here and I'm going to sit here with you.
I think that's
And
very
I'll keep
powerful.
doing it. I'll keep doing it tomorrow. I'll keep doing it next week. I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
I think acknowledging that you've told me something scary. This is scary for me too, but I'm not going to be scared away. I'm still here with you. We're going to do this together.
I'm curious when we talk about if you're in a therapy session and maybe someone also doesn't feel close enough to their therapist. Maybe it's over Zoom, and not to knock Zoom therapy. I think everyone should have a therapist. I think it's 100%. Someone to talk to, right? But if you feel like you can't quite get there and you dance around the edges, I mean, how do you tell someone that, yes, this can be something that's not, maybe they're worried, right, that they're going to end up at the hospital too because that therapist is going to make more calls because they have to.
I think that's where it's very important that we share our own stories. Because especially with young people, you mentioned that the second leading cause of death in 10 to 24-year-olds is death by suicide. Mm-hmm. And with that age group particularly, peer support is so important. They want to talk to other people their age who go through things that they go through and maybe have experienced those same thoughts. And I think it's something that's much more accessible, much more accepted. And it can be very powerful in somebody's life. Even if you both struggle with something, you can have an understanding of that person and be there together.
Dr. Rodriguez, do you think that some professionals are just not, talking about awareness isn't enough, do you think some are just not aware enough?
Absolutely. There's more work that can be done, both in what I was saying is helping people have a shared understanding of what the function of suicide is for many people, right? Mm-hmm. And I think what often happens for therapists is in those moments, without sufficient training, without knowing how to cope with it, what shows up is their own anxiety, and they're sitting there in that session thinking, oh no, if this happens, I'm going to lose my license, and it's, if they don't have their own emotion regulation skills, which come from the confidence of, I've received training, I know how to respond in a way that's going to be supportive and helpful, then they're spending most of their time in that session regulating their own emotions and then spending 45 minutes in a suicide risk assessment, rather than what might be more helpful is figuring out what's the problem and how can I help you with that. So yes, I do think that more education and of course that flexibility to respond in ways that are going to be helpful comes from training. The more tools you have, the more flexibly and effectively you can respond when that does show up.
Karen.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that we have people call the 988 crisis line that are, one, unable to find therapy due to various barriers. Sometimes the barrier being that they have a past history of suicide attempts and a therapist is unwilling to take them on. I think it's really important that we, wait, I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. Cut that muse out.
That's all right.
I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, we're talking about professionals and
yes.
awareness of
yes.
professionals need to
exactly.
have.
So, related to that, I think that as a professional with my clients, I like to really remind them what needs to happen for me to send you to the hospital against your will. You can talk about suicidal thoughts here. You can have a plan. You can have means. You can have intent. If you're willing to safety plan with me, we can come up with a solution here and keep you in the community.
I always say that to clients. The last choice for me is you going to the hospital. Mm-hmm. I never want to get there. Let's figure out what steps we need to take to keep us from getting there. And also just saying it out loud. Are you suicidal? Are you going to hurt yourself? I think younger, less experienced therapists may I train grad students, baby therapists, therapistitos, and I tell them, like, it's scary for them. It's scary for them when someone comes in and says they're suicidal, and I'm like, you cannot shy away from that. If them saying I'm thinking about hurting myself or killing myself, and that scares you, and you go into that place of, oh God, I'm panicking. What do I do? What do I do? You are no longer present for that person.
Can I ask you a tough question, Amy? Is there
Yes.
anything? Okay. Is there a case that you dealt with that haunts you? That now that it's done, over, whatever, if you had to do it again, you would have done it differently?
I can say that I think that the process of becoming a therapist is inherently it's an apprentice model, and you only learn to do it by doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look back at some of the earliest cases that I carried when I was first a trainee, and I look back now and I can think about many people, like today, 2023 me could do a better job. Right? Like, and yet there's no other way to learn how to be a therapist other than to do it. So yes, like I do think, I'm like, it's the tough reality of how we learn how to do therapy is by doing it. You can't just read books about it, and therefore in the process, I think there are times that I look back and think like, oof, they helped pay the tuition for me to learn how to be the therapist I am today.
Amy?
I think that for me, as a young therapist, being in that nervous place and thinking, oh God, what do I have to do? And what is my supervisor going to say? And is she going to lose her license? And I have to make a call. And I did make a call and did not take into account the trauma that this person had experienced with the police force. And what ended up happening was the police coming to their door was more traumatic for them than the suicidality, frankly. And I would have, I mean, again, hindsight's 20/20, but I would have made some different choices in terms of my interventions at that point in terms of staying present. And again, that should be the last option because I just wasn't focused on what that might mean for them.
Well, two things there, right? Kind of said it all. We're learning. You were learning as you go. We're all learning together, and I think that's why it's important that we did this, and staying present, which is what we heard before. If you just need to sit with somebody, and that's what they need you to do, sit with somebody for as long as it takes. Sit with them the next day.
I think therapists, though, need to hear that from each other, too, though. That sometimes, it's okay to not have the answer, but still be present there with your client. And I think that's where it comes back to sharing our stories, not just as people with suicidal ideation or survivors or anything else, but I think even in the treatment community, that's where I've learned the most is hearing, different, because I've probably seen thousands of people now throughout my career. But when I am able to share stories with other people, that just further amplifies our learning and our opportunities to gain from that.
Yeah, just be here for each other. Dr. Wong, Dr. Rodriguez, Carolyn, Amy, thank you so much for coming up here and talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for joining us here in the Helpful Honda Sound Space for Awareness is Not Enough.
We hope that we've made some progress in moving beyond awareness and starting to at least put a dent in this epidemic.
Thanks to the entire Odyssey Los Angeles family for supporting our contribution to the National I'm Listening campaign, because we all know that these conversations can save lives. For Charles Feldman, I'm Mike Simpson. Good night.